Right. This is Krishna. Welcome to Sversity. And as you know, Sversity is a learning service from Koyya Enterprises. This session is about quickly reviewing CSS technology as part of fundamentals of our front-end fundamentals in the MERN stack. Let's look at the resume that we have used as an illustration during the HTML review session. We built a HTML web page document using plain HTML, and this was the output. I hope you might have tried on your own machines, and you might have got something similar to this. Even though this page is having all the data, all the content that it wants to convey to its audience, but it lacks visual appeal. How about this one? So you have two ways of, there are two different visual presentations here. On the left side is the one that is expected on a mobile device, whereas the right side one is expected maybe, let's say, on a desktop machine. It's the same content, but presented in a slightly different manner. I do not say this is greatly, this is having a great visual appeal, but definitely have a better visual appeal than a plain HTML document that we have seen in the previous slide. So how do we get this presentation detail? How do we add these presentational decorations to a plain HTML document? That is where CSS really helps us. So in this session, we'll be looking at briefly about its history, some basics, and how do we embed CSS in HTML. And then we spend some time on the several selectors of CSS, several properties of CSS. We'll try to understand what is that box model and responsive design. And we'll come back to the same resume illustration. We'll try to see like what kind of CSS can help us to get to there. And then we'll look at some assignments, summary, and next steps. CSS was co-created by two people. The names are very hard for me to pronounce. Maybe let me try this way. Hakan VM Lee and Bert Boss. I'm 100% sure the pronunciation is something different in their native language, but that's okay. Lee has worked with Tim Berners-Lee, you know. He was instrumental in making the HTML the way it is, right? At CERN Labs, same CERN Labs. And they presented this initial work on CSS, this is how we can use styling and etc. He was instrumental in that. And but Boss has developed a test browser to see like how the CSS and HTML are actually working together and being rendered. So that way, the credit of CSS goes to these two folks. Later, W3C, our World Wide Web Consortium, took the responsibility of handling the CSS development. Initially, it was just CSS, but later, when they are revising these standards and etc., they started calling them as like level 1, level 2, level 3. And level 3 was, or has been, or even today, it is the level 3 that is mostly deployed CSS version. After that, we never saw a level 4 because instead of taking CSS as one single work, it was modularized, and each module is evolving at its own pace. So there is no common name for that. That's why we only see CSS level 3. After that, we never see CSS level 4. And that URL, which you can visit, and that gives you the real specifications behind CSS. To understand CSS, let's look at some of the very basic things. It stands for, of course, cascading style sheets. Cascading. Why that word is because you may create several style sheets and the net effect of the styling is outcome of cascading all of them. We'll see what actually it means little later. What CSS does is like fundamentally it adds styling rules to the elements. Where are those elements? They can be in any markup document, including our HTML markup documents. What is that rule consists of? Basically two things. The rule will have a selector and then a set of, right? You can see here, right? A set of property and value pairs. A set of property and value pairs, any number of them. So you select an element and you add the styling properties along with their values. That is what CSS does. You'll have several, that way, several selectors, each one with several properties and values. How do you select an element? Here we are saying selector, right? How do you select an element? You may select an element just by tag name. For example, here you see div is a tag name. So when you say like div is the selector, the CSS renderer will select all the div elements in the given HTML document and adds these properties, styling properties. For example, here, background color is a styling property whose value is set to blue. So net effect is that all div elements will be having blue color background and white color text in it. This is just one way of selecting elements. Apart from tag name, you can also use ID of the HTML elements. Typically, we have used IDs in the forms, right? In the HTML review. You can give IDs to any element, in fact. So you can select that specific element either by the ID or there is something called class, which is very much CSS technology. HTML tag names and IDs are HTML technology, whereas class is a special attribute that is added to the HTML. And the class is all about, again, selecting elements. We'll see each one of these three, like how we select elements either by tag name or by ID or by class. But before that, where do we write all these CSS style rules? You may write in a separate file, then it becomes external CSS. Or you may write all the CSS rules in one place in a given HTML document itself. Then it becomes internal styling. Or you may write the styling rules for each of the elements within the element itself instead of across the document. Then we call it as inline styling. If you are going with external styling, which is recommended best practice, you will be once you write that CSS file, you'll have to link it with the HTML, right? That's where you'll be using the link tag. If you remember, link tag is part of head section of any HTML document. For example, you see here in the HTML head section, if we write this particular why it is selecting two lines. Okay, don't worry about that. So basically, this is what I'm talking about, the code part. So here, the link is the element within head section. A rel or a relation is the attribute name. There you specify it as style sheet and give the reference, H reference, hyperlink reference of or the URL of your externally written CSS document. So if you are not giving any path or anything relative or absolute path, as you know, it is expected that the file that you are referring here, for example, here in this case, styles.css, right? It is expected in the same folder where you have the HTML document as well. So CSS is the natural extension to any CSS files. And this file can be on the local machine or you may load it from a remote web server over the network. And as I mentioned, writing CSS externally in this manner is always a best practice. If you say like, no, Krishna, I would like to write CSS within my HTML page, it is just a small amount of CSS. Then in the head section again, you may have it in anywhere, but typically in the head section, you can have style tag And within the style, between those style opening and closing tags, you write all the styling rules, CSS rules, right? All the selectors and properties and everything. By the way, when you're writing styling and CSS files internally or externally, if you want to write in a comments, all you need to do is like prefix that line of comment with this hash symbol, just like double slash in C++ and etc. or hash in Python. Hash is also used as comment symbol in the case of CSS. External and internal, apart from these two, you have inline CSS also, right? So there you'll be using style attribute. For example, this is a specific development. And within this development, for this development alone, you want to apply some style. There, all you need to do is like style attribute you'll have to use. And in the what do you call, value section, you will have to write the properties and their values, the key CSS properties and their values. Once you write several CSS files and CS inline or externally or whatever, what happens is that the ultimate result of CSS rules would be in this manner, would be governed by this rule. What is that rule? Local CSS always override the others. Means if there is a div element with this kind of a styling, so the font size is 12, that is what inline we are defining, right? Even in the internal CSS, if you say like div element should have font size of 14, 12 overrides internal CSS definitions. Similarly, if there is any external CSS, internal CSS overrides external CSS. Of course, you need to write if you are following the actual order. And you may include several CSS files externally. And both the CSS files may be having the rules that are in conflict with each other. In such case, what happens? The recent most CSS rules, whether it is inline or external or internal, the most nearest or the most recent CSS rule wins the race. If there is no conflict, whether you define them in externally or internally or inline, they're all merged together. This entire process is what you call as cascading. That's why these style sheets are called as cascading style. Cascaded or cascading style sheets. Now let us look at the selectors: element selector, ID selector, and class selector we talked about, right? So in the element selector, all you need to do is like just specify the name of the element. If you want to say like, no, for all the elements, all you need to do is just say star. As a selector, if you use star, it selects everything within the given document. Instead, if you give a specific name, it's, for example, here, it selects all div elements. Here, it selects all H1 elements. You may also use some CSS expressions here, like div comma H1. Then it will select both all the div elements as well as H1 elements. If you say background must be blue, all H1 elements as well as div elements will be in blue background. You can also give a different, other expressions. Here it is comma. Observe that here it is comma. Whereas here in this case, the div and H1 are separated by a space. What it infers is that this particular selector, if you give, then it will select all H1 elements that are appearing as part of div elements. If there is a H1 element that is not part of a div element, that will not be selected. Only H1 elements that are part of div elements are selected when you use space. If you use greater than symbol, then it will select all H1 elements as long as it has div as its parent. The difference between div space H1 and div greater than H1 is that here the H1 must have div as its immediate parent, whereas here H1 should have a div as its parent or grandparent or whatever in the entire structure. As long as it is part of a div tree, that is more than enough. In case if you want to go with select all H1 elements that immediately appear after div element, for example, then you use plus symbol. You have few other syntax rules. You may just refer to them. Because we are giving these kind of expressions, and an element selector may select 0 number of elements if there are nothing matching that rule, or one element which may match that rule if there is only one, or if there are several elements that match this rule, all of them get selected and those rules are applicable to all of them. Apart from the element selectors, or as part of the element selection, you may also use attributes for selection. You can also use ID selection as well as class selection. Then we call them as like combinator rules or combinator selectors, sorry. So we'll see them once we see ID as well as the class selector. See, ID selector, you know, ID is unique. That means for a given element, if you assign an ID, that will never be assigned to any other element. It is supposed to be it is supposed to be that way. So that way, when you are selecting an element through ID, either you will be able to select just one element if there is any element with that ID, or 0 if there is no element with that ID. So how do you say we are actually using ID as the selector? You need to write that ID in that ID, and it should be prefixed with hash symbol. For example, here, if I say my selector is hash UID, then this will be selected because ID is UID here, it is matching. This will not be selected because there is no ID at all. This will not be selected because even though there is an ID here, but still this is not matching with the rule of UID. All right. You can use comma separation if you want to use multiple elements with with different IDs. For example, if you say hash UID comma hash PWD, it will select all the elements, either as long as they have UID as the ID or PWD as the ID. For example, in this case, since ID is UID, it will be selected. There is no ID at all, it will not be selected. This is also selected because ID is PWD, which you are anyway interested in. You may use a combinator, like here you see there is no prefix, it is just input, and input, you know, it is a HTML element. So input hash UID. This selector results in selecting all the input elements, or selecting that one input element which is having UID as its ID. For example, you see here, this is an input element. Just because it is input element, it will not be selected for this expression. It is an input element and its ID is UID. So that's why it gets selected. Whereas here, even though ID is UID, but since it is not an input element, it will not be selected. Right? So this is ID selector. So a hash prefix is ID selection. And class selection is like you'll be using dot as the prefix. You'll be using dot as the prefix. An element may be declared to have one class, 0 number of classes, or any number of classes. And a given class can be assigned to any number of elements. Class is just an attribute, nothing actually. It is meant for CSS purpose. Let us see this. Let's say if the selector is like dot error. If the selector is just only dot error, then what happens? Because this label is having class attribute with value error, it gets selected. Because this label is also having a class attribute in which error is one of its value, it is also get selected. Observe here, class can have multiple, values, or an element can have multiple classes like this separated by space. Dot error is only saying that as long as an element is having error as it's one of the classes, it selects. So that's why both these things are getting selected. Here I am using comma separation, dot error, comma, dot note. What does it mean? It selects all the elements with either having error as the class or having note as the class. So here, because it is error, it will be selected. Because this is note, it is also get selected. Here it is a combinator. It is using all the three combinations. Label is the element selector, message is the ID selector, error is the class selector. So it selects element that of nature, that is a label element, as long as it is having MSG as its ID and also having error as its class. You see here, this is a label, okay. It is having a class called error, that is also okay. ID is message. So it is matching all the three classes of this combination. So it selects. Whereas here, even though class is error and ID is message according as required, but the element is not a label, it is div. So this is not selected. So these are the three varieties of selectors, major selectors. You can also select elements using attributes. If I say selector as just within the square brackets, if I just write something, it means select all the elements where href is one of its attributes. Whereas here, href is an attribute with a given value. Here, href is an attribute and its value contains this text. Here you see that pipe symbol. Here it selects all the elements where href is an attribute and its value is either Koyya or it starts with Koyya. All right. Here it selects all the elements where href is its attribute and its value of that attribute starts with Koyya only. And here anywhere, right? It selects any number of any element whose in which href is an attribute and its value contains Koyya. A substring that contains Koyya. Right. So here it is like ending. As long as the href value is ending with com, it selects. All right. So look at the syntax for these attributes online. You will have lots of syntaxes. You may require these syntaxes depending on which element you want to select in a given document. As and when it is required, learn the syntax. Over a period of time, you gain the command over it. Learning all the syntaxes in just one page in one go is not of any use. It is just only to give you an idea that there are several ways in which you can select elements, and that's it. You don't try to remember them. Practice them. You will automatically remember. There are some certain selectors which are called as pseudo selectors. Pseudo selectors are based on the context they select elements. So for example, here again, few examples only. You read these things on your own. Let me not read and again repeat the same thing. It is just only presented here for the purpose of example. But for example, if I say colon root, pseudo selectors are always contained at colon symbol. If I say colon root, it means it's not a root is not element name. It is contextually an element as long as it is in the given context. If an element acts as the root element, whichever it is, that gets selected. For example, here P is an element name and pseudo selector is empty, means any paragraph that do not have any children, empty paragraphs. Here A is the element, active is the pseudo selector. So it selects all the active HTML tags, whereas here it selects all the tags or all the anchor tags, not HTML actually. All the anchor tags as long as they are getting hovered by your mouse. And so on. You can check several varieties of pseudo selectors. You can also have pseudo selectors based on the placement in the document. For example, P colon first child. These are also pseudo selectors only. P colon first child. What this selection does or selects? It selects every P element because it is ID selector, sorry, element selector. But as long as it is the first child of its parent. You may have several paragraphs. These paragraphs will have their own parents. There may be one parent with multiple paragraphs. What this selection does is like it selects all the paragraphs that are the first child for its parent. This is based on placement. A very useful thing. These nth children and such kind of stuff. Just use them. Keep using them so that you will gain practice or command over that those selectors. Okay, after that, now we know what those selectors are. Before looking at the properties, let us look at something called box model. This box model is to explain some of the properties. See, in HTML, you'll have some content, maybe H1, maybe a paragraph content, something like content, textual content. It can be text also, but you will have some content, web content. You may want to give a border around that content. The space between the border and the content is called as padding, and the space between border and the next element or the surrounding element is called as margin. Remember this. And then try to understand these properties. Border is one of the most used property. You can specify border colors, border styles, border width, border radius. You can select border on any of those 4 sizes and different combinations of, like, for example, if you see here, left side border, what should be the style? Whether it is dotted line or something like that. Or here, if you see border top width, on the top of the element, you will have a border, and what should be the width of that border? And so on. You can use images also as borders, and so on. Just go through them. Let me not read them. Okay, border is one of the property, and use it to make your documents really interesting. Background, of course, you may set colors as background, images as background. You can specify the size of the background. If you are using image, for example, and the element size is more than the background size, what do you want to do then? Whether you want to stretch the background image or you want to repeat the background image to fill the space, you can specify those properties. Similarly, fonts, you can specify which font you want to use. Typically, you will specify the families of the fonts. For example, you may say Arial is the font, Helvetica as a font. You can specify the sizes. Sizes you can specify in different ways. You may specify in points, EMs, VWs, and so on. Again, learn more about them. Or if see, this presentation is not to teach or introduce CSS for the beginners. No, this is only for us to quickly review the CSS that you might already know. So you should have known like all these things. So try to recollect them. Okay. Similarly, font style, whether you want to have it as normal or italic, whether you want to have stretched or condensed, blah, blah, blah. You can use even custom fonts also. In such a case, you'll have to first install the font phase. You specify what is the name that the custom font is having and where is the font file. You have to specify in this manner. Pure text, you can specify text justifications, little decorations, like whether you want to underline the text, color the text, indentation, and such kind of stuff with respect to decorating the text. Similarly, animations also, you can specify a bit of animation using the animation property, maybe better understood by the name here. So you'll be using some, this is the animation name called Koyya. And how do you know it is animation name? Because you are using keyframes. You are using keyframes. So this animation says that, the animation by name Koyya says that whatever content it is, it gets animated from this styling state to this styling state. What is the initial original styling state of that element? Its background color will be in red. You may have several styling properties here. I am just writing only one here. You can have any number of them within these curly braces in a proper format, of course. This is not pure JSON also, remember. Okay. So initially the content would be in the red color background, but by the time that animation finishes, it would get into yellow color background. It would get into yellow color background. So where do we use this animation? For any element. For example, he's here, all the div elements we are selecting. I'm giving some background color as red, and I'm saying animation is Koyya. Means from red, change its background color to yellow. But how long, what is the duration? That animation means it takes some time, right? What is the duration? Within 4 seconds. Means over a period of 4 seconds, all the div elements would change their background color from red to yellow. Now it is sky is your limit. You define the animations of your choice and make the document again. Don't make it too clumsy, right? Make it as usable as possible for your target audience. That is important. And there are several other CSS properties, miscellaneous CSS properties, like what should be the positions. If you want to have fixed position for a given element, you may specify like from bottom, what should be the size and etc. And blah, blah, blah. You just look at all of them. Z index is one interesting one. You may use transformations and blah, blah, blah. You may flex thing. If you want to hide an element, even though it is present, if you want to hide an element, you set display to none. Right? Try to understand, try to recollect them, or try to grasp and gather more information about them and try things on your own. There is something called responsive design we talked about, right? A responsive design is about making your documents visually appealing no matter on which device it is open. Let's say if you develop a web page with font sizes and blah, 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 which are fit enough for a mobile device, which is typically vertical. If you open the same thing on a browser, on a desktop machine, which is typically larger and horizontal in the, what do you call that, the orientation. If you are using fixed fonts and everything, you fix it for the mobile, it will appear very, it do not appear properly on a desktop browser. You have two options. Either you have same web page created twice, one for mobile and one for desktop, which is the worst way of doing. Or you write only one HTML, one CSS document, but you specify the selectors and the styling by querying on which media device it is actually being run. That is where these media queries come into picture. These are all called as media queries. So these the responsive design is actually about a way to adapt your web pages to work properly on different varieties of devices, even though you write the document only once. So best practice is like, first make sure that you are having this meta tag on the head section. So it will start without any zoom in and zoom out and occupy your entire viewport of the given device. And then use various media queries and corresponding style sheets or corresponding styling. Always go with mobile first approach, because mobile devices run on may not run on high-fi bandwidth, right? It may run on low bandwidth also. So you do not want to load entire CSS and detect entire CSS and render. It takes a lot of time. Mobile devices are not as powerful as the regular computing devices. So to make sure that the job is done quickly for mobile, you always write your style sheets optimized for mobile devices first. For example, here I'm saying that as long as the media is having a maximum width of 768 pixels, then apply this particular selection. That's what we are saying here. So it should appear first, then the next things. Other responsive design practice is to divide the entire page into 13 columns and then arrange them appropriately depending on your device. If it is a highly having a huge width, if your device is having huge width, then all these 13 columns may appear one after other in the same horizontal fashion. If it is mobile device, they may appear one below each other. So you just see, like, again, try to focus on that when you are practicing CSS. When you are using images, better you use different images for different devices. Otherwise, what happens is, like, if you are using that heavy, high resolution image, which are good for what you call larger screens, On a mobile device, even though it appears cleanly, but it takes a lot of time to download that high resolution image because it is huge in size. Better not to do that way. Use smaller images with smaller devices, larger images for larger devices. Always set width or maximum width as a percentage rather than fixed pixels. Use percentage. Let's say 50% of the width. If you say, then on mobile also it will occupy 50%. On the desktop also it will occupy 50%. Do not specify the height. Set the height as auto so that our aspect ratio is automatically maintained. So here is that example we have seen in the beginning, right? So this left side one is optimized for mobile devices. Right side one is optimized for what do we call the desktop devices. Observe carefully in the academic section. We are writing only university name in the what do you call in the mobile, whereas in the case of desktop device, we are not only giving the university name, but also we are giving the city name. On the mobile device, you again, same, right? Usability is the issue there. If you dump all the content on a mobile device and ask the developer to scroll it several times to get all the content, that may create irritation. You just keep it simple. For mobile devices, keep it simple. On desktop device, because you have the luxury of space, have more info. You see here also the paragraph here, it is having 4 lines. Here it is having 3 lines. So it should automatically be, that way it should be adjustable. It should be adjustable automatically in that manner. Okay, so how we would have written this style sheet? Observe here. First thing is like I'm going with media queries. In case of mobile device, I'm giving for the entire body 25 pixels margin on the left and right. Font size I'm fixing at 14 pixels. Any optional element I am saying don't display them. Any element with optional as the class, set their display to none. Means any element that I consider as optional element, it would not display on a mobile device. If your screen is having minimum of this much, means larger screens, then the body width, the body margins on the left and right are going to be 50 pixels, and font size I increase it to 16 pixels. On mobile it was 14, on the desktop it is going to be 16. So I am setting up some of these rules specific to the device so that the same document would give different results on different devices. It's not that the entire document you will have to write separately using different media queries. No, there are certain areas which need to be different. There are certain areas which may be same in both the cases. For example, the font family is Arial, followed by Helvetica, followed by this. So in priority, you are giving the priority. If Arial is available on the device, show them in Arial. Background, I am giving some RGB combination. So then what happens? This font family and background color is same, no matter whether you are using mobile device or you are using desktop device, because I'm not keeping them in any media breakpoints. So for horizontal ruler, I'm assigning some line, some color. For H3, I'm assigning some font size, and whether it should be bold or not, whether there should be any margin after the heading or not. If there is any element which is whose class is footer, we are saying that all the text must be in the italics. Some more styling, little more styling. The header, what is this header? These are all what do we call those semantic elements, if you remember, header, section, and etc. So the header section, in the header section, the text should be in a centrally aligned manner. Header H1 as well as header H2. That means H1, H2 tags, as long as they are part of header, they must be having no margins. All the anchor elements within the header section, no underline, text decoration is none. Pointer is the cursor, default cursor, of course. What is the background color? What should be the radius of that background? Padding you want to give, and what is the color? And then I'm using a pseudo selection. If that anchor element within the header section, if you are hovering on that, then change the color to black, background color to light gray. So we are giving, sky is your limit, as I mentioned. Learn those properties and the way you select the elements, and then play with your aesthetic sense. A little more. We have some tables, right? That academics tables and other tables. So in the table section, we are specifying that the border, no border for the tables. The table should occupy the 100% width of the given viewport. We are giving width in the percentages, remember. Same thing with the other stuff also, something similar. So we are saying that each of the header element must be occupying 50% of the width. We have only 2 columns, that's fine. Even the data columns also same thing. So when you put all these things together, your HTML document looks something like this. You see the doc type and the header, body, blah, blah, blah. And then what else you are having? You are having meta tag with viewport, right? This is important. And you are externally embedding a style sheet. You're externally embedding a style sheet into this HTML document. And what is the name of the style sheet? 1.css, in the same location where this HTML file is located. And what is the content of that CSS? Whatever we have seen. So the right side is the CSS file. So the media queries followed by anything that is common across all the medias, right? All of them. And this is the code that you see there. All right, so this is one illustration, good enough. You need not look at hundreds of illustrations. You just start trying them. You can try this assignment. This HTML page you might have already built from our earlier HTML quick review. So you may use that HTML and make it this appealing little more better. You might have written a lot of online examinations and MCQ based exams, right? Think about them and make your quiz page also look little better. Same thing with if you look at Amazon or Flipkart, you see order pages, how they look. You try to build in the similar lines. This HTML page also we built in the past, right? So make it again visually appealing by adding CSS. And a login screen, develop a login screen. This is the content. I'm only giving the content. You add the style the way you want. And get it reviewed by your peers or your user community. They will tell whether it is good or bad. No one else give the correct answer, right? It is aesthetics are personal, aesthetics are subjective. A red color is appeals to me, black color appeals to someone else. So you need to do a market research and you need to have general aesthetic sense, right? If you are using red as a background color, you know what it means. Red is typically for food related stuff or something like alarm, alert, such kind of places where you are going to use the red color. So think in those lines, right? Same thing, maybe for a review page, how you want to style it. And it's not review, sorry. Forgot to change this. Maybe a marks card. You might have seen marks cards being downloaded for different exams, right? You know how they look. Try to make them appear in the same way. All right, so these are different assignments you try on your own, and there is no way somebody can say like you have done it correctly or not. You target yourself. This is how I want this document to be visible, and make the CSS to get to that level. Right? You are your own evaluator. And summary is this finally before we close. CSS stands for cascading style sheets, and its job is to add presentation details to the plain web content. CSS level 3 is the most deployed level, and the CSS can be added externally or internally or inline. For an external CSS file, .css is the extension, and you use link tag to embed that in the HTML document. If you want to use internal CSS, you'll use style tag in the head section. For inline CSS, you'll use style attribute this time in any of the HTML elements of your choice. The inline styling overrides internal, which overrides external. That is what we mean by cascading. CSS styling is not really complicated one. It is just a list of selectors and the style declarations for the given selector in the form of property value pairs. You may select these elements either by their name or by the ID field or by the class field or attribute. Use media queries to make the documents responsive. We have seen them, right? Always go with mobile first approach because most of the people use mobile devices to access your web page. And you need to optimize for those mobile devices in terms of speed or visual, whatever it is. Right, so that's the summary. So by going through this and by doing those exercises, you will definitely gain a lot of command on CSS so that you can go to the next level. You might have seen HTML, now you have seen CSS. The next step is to get into JavaScript. It adds behavior to your web page. Even the JavaScript is a general purpose programming language. Popularly, it is known to be used in the web application front-end development. So we need to learn JavaScript. Learn in the sense, again, we'll review JavaScript. If you are a very newcomer, then you will have to properly learn JavaScript. When we are working on the front-end side, we'll have to deal with the DOM or the document object model, which specify the browser's objects, their structure, behavior, and etc. So that also you need to know. The HTTP protocol you need to know that connects the browser with the server. And the AJAX is something that is again interesting, which makes the browser-server communication more lively. Once you learn this entire set, HTML, CSS, JS, DOM, HTTP, and AJAX, I would not say it is exhaustive list, but 80-20 rule, right? If you learn this much, you can develop 80% of your web applications like a pro. Right? So that's it for the day. Thank you. Bye.